Hey everyone, my name is Sarah Peterson and I'm the videographer for our presentation for group number 3. So for our presentation, we chose to make our focus on emotional disturbance and ADHD disabilities. So for emotional disturbance, it's important to note that this is a high incidence disability. It is a way of thinking or a state of mind that affects the way a person must control a certain situation. It often lasts for a long period of time. It can take away or distract from the learning situation or the learning environment of the student. An important note to also consider is that emotional disturbance is not one specific event or one specific disturbance. In fact, it can include so many different types of disturbances, ranging from schizophrenia, depression, anxiety, even to illogical phobias, fears, OCD, eating disorders, or even just inappropriate behavior. Also, there are many things that contribute to emotional disturbances. It's often been found that there are hereditary traces or hereditary genes that can factor in, as well as brain disorders, and even maybe less commonly known, emotional disturbances can come from simple things such as diet, stress, and different family functions and dynamics. So, what are the challenges of having students that suffer from emotional disturbance in our classrooms? Well, it's hard to predict their next reaction or how they'll respond to a different activities. It's also more difficult for these students to cultivate relationships because the other students don't know what reactions are going to happen from their peers, and nor do we as teachers. Some reactions and responses are just unplanned. Because of that, many times students such as these, they need a little extra attention, they need a little extra help in mastering subjects of study, or even help with interactions with others, and more commonly, their struggles with self-awareness, increased self-esteem, and self-control. So what are some things that we can do or strategies we can use as teachers to help these students? Some of them, some of the teaching strategies that can help is providing these students with tutors, allowing students to choose between classroom tasks, keeping the family involved. It's important to remember just because our students are having emotional disturbances, it doesn't necessarily mean that there are poor choices being made at home, such as abuse, or, you know, it's not always the case. It is important, however, to keep our eyes open, keep our ears open, and to be aware of any red flags, to be aware if there is abuse. But it's important to remember again that in most cases, emotional disturbances extend from a genetic cause. Another important strategy and thing to consider is build trust with these students, build trust with their family, and also find it in your heart to have empathy for them and for the struggles they're having. Um, Other important things we can do as teachers is to be consistent in our teaching methods and in our activities, and give specific praise. Let them know they're doing well. Let them know that things are okay, that they're getting it, they will get it, and praise them for what they do understand. Help build them up, essentially. Some other treatments that these students may need and can be provided to them is counseling and with psychological services. There's also positive behavioral support, which is basically a series of techniques that encourage academic achievement, social skills, self awareness, and self esteem, which are some challenges we spoke of earlier. There is also medication that can be provided if your physician feels it is necessary, or as parents may feel necessary. There are also other special education services that are more individualized for these students. Also, it's important to know and to let families be aware that emotional disturbances, they're a big thing. And so there are a lot of support options, such as Project Ideal, the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, Center on Positive Behavioral Interventions and Supports, Council for Exceptional Children, and many others. There are even technologies that can be helpful for students who suffer from emotional disturbance. Technologies such as word processors and text-to-speech software. Word processors allow students to make edits as they work and aids the writing process. With the text-to-speech software, it also furthers the student's ability to make corrections and fix mistakes, just because it allows the student time and the ability to really focus on what they're doing. Moving on to our lower incidence disability, ADHD, it's important to note that this is not a new disability. I feel like in recent years it's maybe been brought to light more so, but it was actually discovered in the 1800s. Though it is more common in boys than girls, it's also important to note that it is not only in boys, which is a very common misconception. Some of the symptoms for students that suffer ADHD can be a difficulty with sitting still, paying attention, controlling their impulses, also a difficulty following instructions, perhaps even organization, or simply waiting or taking turns. What is important to remember, though, is that there are many young children who have a hard time with several of these symptoms listed above. So it can be difficult to distinguish from a child's just normal energy and behavior and learning, and a child who really does have ADHD. And so it's generally found that if a student has at least 6 of these symptoms, then they do qualify for a diagnosis of ADHD. Another added fact is that ADD and ADHD are the same disorder. The name was simply changed in the 90s to simplify diagnosis, but often causes confusion for many people. So what are the causes of ADHD? Honestly, it's not entirely clear. It's said and it's been found that there's a strong genetic link with multiple genes influencing the expression of the disorder. But here's maybe an easier thing to understand is what, and more importantly, things that do not cause ADHD. Many of these are just simple misconceptions that have been brought up through the years, such as vaccines, stress or diet of the mother during pregnancy, eating sugar, watching TV, family stress, poverty, divorce, other social, economic issues, and traumatic experiences. Though these are not causes of ADHD, it is important to understand that some of these symptoms can aggravate children who have ADHD. They can be triggers. That's important to watch as a teacher. So what are some of the challenges we may see or have, or that our students will have? Well, they might have a difficulty participating appropriately in the classroom. Students often have other behavioral problems that have their root in ADHD. For girls, it's been found that they often have a difficulty getting recognition of their condition because of a misconception that the only, like as we talked about before, the only boys have ADHD. Also, there is also that misconception that ADHD is a new or unproven condition, which it is still in the works, but it doesn't mean it's not existent. Um, some some individuals will find that ADHD is just made up or a reason to give teachers an excuse to medicate students. Sometimes this gives families concerns about seeking treatment, which it's kind of a hard thing, I think. It's a hard decision that should be thought out, which, going back to when we were talking about um, with emotional disturbances, it is important to have a good connection with the family and to really allow them to think it out and encourage them to think it out, study it out for themselves. But what can we do as teachers again? Can we do? One thing is to establish clear rules and routines. Don't make it complex. Also, if you know that you have students who may suffer more from ADHD, reduce the distractions in the room. Make a good learning environment. Be aware of your students. Also, be careful of insisting on making the students sit still. Sitting in an unconventional way, some fidgeting, or getting up to sharpen a pencil may be helping them stay focused. Sometimes these students need a little more movement. Try to help accommodate in a manner that can help all students, especially if they're younger. Another thing is to use positive role models. And lastly, broadcast clear transitions between activities. This will help with making sure there isn't any confusion and these students don't get lost, and that that in itself can help them stay on task. So, what are some treatments of ADHD? Though it doesn't have a cure, like many learning disabilities or disabilities in and of themselves, there are many things that we can do to help them. Unfortunately, much of ADHD symptoms will probably be had by these students for their whole life. But what can they do to help? What can we do to help? Well, there is cognitive behavior therapy and mindfulness training, which have shown to be the most effective treatment. Also, they can do coaching and group therapy. Sometimes it's easier to work through a disability when you're not by yourself. Medication can be effective. I think that's what we hear about most often is, should I medicate, should I not? But it's something to consider. It may be either a stimulant or a depressant, depending on the form of the disorder. So that's something to keep in mind as well for the parents that you're working with. Just like many other disabilities, ADHD does have support organizations such as CHAD, which is called the National Resource Center on ADHD. Also, there's Attention Deficit Disorder Association and the National Institute of Mental Health are really good places to go. Some useful assistive technologies for ADHD are speech recognition software, word processors, as we talked about before, talking calculators, text-to-speech software. All of these can be really helpful because they are oral reinforcement. Hearing what the student is also reading can help them focus and retain information. So just keep that in mind with your students and with the disabilities that they have, because different methods and different tools may actually help them achieve their optimal learning abilities. So that's all we have for you today, and I hope you can hear me, and I hope you enjoyed this and that you got as much out of it as I did. Can't wait to hear what you have to say. So see ya.